New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Lynn Katz, and I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, I'm bringing you a very brilliant and insightful guest. His name is Dr. Steven Hassan, and he is the author of numerous books on combating cult mind control and undue influence. A few of his books include Releasing the Bonds, Empowering People to Think for Themselves, Combating Cult Mind Control, and Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs. And he has a very successful and busy practice that's also called Freedom of Mind. We are going to be talking about not just formal cults, but also different levels of institutionalized control and how people can recognize when they're in a cult, how to get out of a cult, and how to help loved ones who also may be influenced by cults or other leaders that don't have their best interest in mind. Thank you for watching. Hi, Steven. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you start off by telling us, how did you get involved in a cult?
Sure. Well, I was raised conservative Jewish in Flushing, Queens, New York, with two older sisters. My mom was an art teacher. My dad had a hardware store. I was an SP student, which meant I skipped 8th grade, which meant I entered college at 17 and was writing poetry and short stories and working as a banquet waiter at the Holiday Inn in Hempstead. I had no interest in joining a cult of any kind or changing religions. What happened to me back in February of 1974 was my girlfriend basically abruptly broke up with me, and I was shocked and in the dumps. And I was sitting in the cafeteria at Queens College waiting for the spring semester to start. I purchased my books. And three women walked over to my table and said, "Can they sit?" And they introduced themselves as students, and they were dressed like students. They carried books like students, but they weren't. And they were members of a front group of the Moon Cult, which many people don't know who the Moonies are. They were in the media a lot, but in the last few decades, people don't think of them at all, don't recognize them. They recognize the Washington Times, which is their newspaper and propaganda arm. They probably don't know that he owns most of the sushi fishing industry in the United States, and that two of his sons own a gun factory making guns and has a cult. But back to my story, I met these women, they flirted with me, they invited me over for dinner, and through a series of manipulations, lies, etc., I went away to a weekend workshop, which I didn't know was a workshop, and my brain got hacked, and they wanted me to stay. It was a 3-day workshop. I thought it was 2-day fun getaway. And then when I was there, it was, no, it's a workshop. And the bottom line, though, is they wanted me to stay for a 7-day workshop, which I refused. I went back home because I wanted to go back to classes. And my mom said, let's go see the rabbi. And the rabbi was clueless. And long story short, I thought God was summoning me to save the world, and believed that Sun Myung Moon was the greatest man in human history, was the Moshiach, or the Messiah. He was going to fulfill Jesus' unfinished mission. And I worked for 27 months. I had dropped out of college, working 18 to 21 hours a day, recruiting people, raising money, doing political demonstrations for the cult. And I was elevated to a leadership position, which was really in face only, not in real power. And I was like really gone.
What was the defining moment when you started to realize that this was a cult or something was going on that indicated you were in trouble?
And my story of how I got out was I fell asleep at the wheel of a fundraising van and woke up as I was driving into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, which landed me in the hospital away from the cult, and sleeping and eating. And I called my sister, not because I had any doubts, but just because I was lonely and bored. She convinced me to come visit her. I convinced the Mooney leaders to let me visit her because she had never said I was in a cult or was brainwashed, unlike my parents who were evil and satanic. But she did tell my parents. They did hire ex-members, and I eventually agreed to a several-day deprogramming because I was so convinced I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. And during that deprogramming, what helped me wake up, I think, were a number of things. One was just being with former members who were sane and nice and smart, who were sharing their horror stories as members. So that was interesting because they would tell me a horrible story, and I'd think of a much more horrible story that happened to me. Of course, I wouldn't tell them. But they started, seeding my mind and my memory. The big things that helped me get out was learning about Chinese communist brainwashing. They shared Robert J. Lifton's work in 1961. He wrote a very famous book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China. And we went through the 8 criteria, and it was clear that the Moonies did all 8, which was confusing because communism was Satan and we were God. Still wasn't out. And the thing that woke me up was the final day they handed me one of Moon's speeches to congressmen and senators and just said, "What do you think, Steve? Just read this and tell us what you think." And Moon was, this was in print. He was saying to congressmen and senators how surprised he was that anyone could imagine that he, Reverend Moon, a Korean, could ever brainwash American youth, because he knows, how smart American youth are and how much he respects American youth. And I had the first negative thought in 2.5 years, because I had been with him at least 100 times where he said how stupid Americans were and the Koreans were the master race. So for the first time, I thought, what a liar. And as soon as I surfaced that one doubt, it felt like a house of cards started falling in my mind, because I started thinking, if he's a liar, that means he can't be a man of God, because God is a God of truth. And if he's not a man of God, that means he can't be the Messiah. And if he's not the Messiah, then he's not trustworthy. Then what am I doing being in this group? I could stay in the group for another 50 years and the kingdom of heaven on earth would never appear. And I just started crying at that point, because I had given so much of my heart and soul to trust that I was doing God's will to help the world. And the experience so affected me that I needed to understand what happened to me, and started reading more books about brainwashing and mind control and persuasion. And eventually, within a few months, asked to meet with Lifton himself, and to which I was explaining how the Moonies operated, and he did the major thing that changed my life course. He just said, I just studied this secondhand, but you've lived this. They did it to you and you did it to others. And you should study psychology and explain it to people like me. And I went from this ashamed, embarrassed college dropout with a cast on his leg to maybe I have something of value to offer. And I became a clinical therapist and written 4 books, and the rest is history. That's 48 years now that I've been doing this work full time.
I know you've developed a theory, and I'm wondering, we can talk about that in just a little bit, but do you feel that you continue to learn about cults and these subject matters even after all these years of studying it? Do you have new epiphanies?
I'm learning all the time. I'm a lifelong learner. And of course, the knowledge of how the brain works, neuroscience, social psychology, big data, and now online activity and hypnosis online keeps evolving. And with AI, it keeps evolving. I feel like undue influence is the number one issue on the planet today, because all other problems could be solved but we got to get this one right, because bad actors who want to keep us addicted to fossil fuels, even though it's murdering our planet, keep using, and in fact, my former cult, the Moonies, for disinformation about climate science denial. And what we're experiencing right now in 2024 is psychological warfare on a scale that's never been done before. And because America doesn't have any data privacy protections for its citizens, we're sitting ducks for Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Christian nationalists, Nazis, and a whole bunch of other bad actors, that if we're not educated about what is ethical influence and what is unethical influence and how to tell the difference, which is why I created the influence continuum graphic on my website, Freedom of Mind, and the BITE model, which stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, which has now been validated as the first scientific construct for evaluating undue influence. I feel like psychoeducation is what we need, and we need to deploy it to inoculate people, to help rescue people who've been co-opted, and to help people recover who are coming out the other side going, what happened to me? Just like it happened to me in 1976.
And undue influence, can you define that word?
Yeah, it's a legal term. Due influence is ethical influence. Undue influence is unethical influence. It's 300 years or so old British common law. And it was created as a law essentially because people who are property owners were being co-opted by caretakers or by others. And instead of turning over their wealth to their children and their heirs, it got snagged by the bad actors. So the British created a law saying, you unduly influence so-and-so to take all their property. The problem with that concept that was so old is it was about property, whereas my work is about, it's co-opting identity. It's actually taking over our mind. And speaking as a mental health professional, the best way to understand mind control is it creates a pseudo-identity that is in the image of the leader, the doctrine, or the group itself. So think of your computer and you're clicking by deception on a bad link. It installs malware and it takes over your operating system. Well, it takes over our operating system of our identity. And we use our beliefs, we use our minds to filter reality and to direct us of what to do and what not to do.
You talk about part of the treatment for people who are drawn into cults or cult-like behavior. you talk about how the treatment is to help them get back to themselves. But there is one theory of social constructionism that says nobody is really ever quite themselves because they're programmed by their parents or society. And sometimes people are drawn into these groups or new ways of thinking because the old way was repressive. So do you feel that people really do have a true self, or is it just constructed by someone and it's a matter of whose version of reality do you want to go back to?
Well, so that's an interesting question. I would say that it's more nuanced than that, and I would direct your listeners, if they're not watching the video, to come to Freedom of Mind and look at this graphic called the Influence Continuum. And on this side is ethical influence, and this is unethical. And ethical parenting is what we call authoritative parenting versus authoritarian parenting. And ethical parenting is developmentally appropriate, meaning when you're born, your parents have to do everything for you, but the goal is to help you grow up to become an adult where you think for yourself, make your own decisions, decide if you want to join mommy and daddy's church or synagogue or whatever. And unfortunately, there aren't courses that people have to pass before they get a marriage license, before they become parents, to understand you don't just hit kids if they disobey you. You have to use words. You know, there's a lot going on for a good attachment, good emotions. And lately, I've been interviewing experts in neuroscience who tell me that parents shouldn't even allow their children to see any screen for the first 3 years of life. That means even a TV screen, much less an iPad or an iPhone or something, because the brain is pruning billions of neurons, and children need humans because they're picking up learnings all the time, smells and emotions and everything. And that human contact, physical contact, is so vital to a healthy child. We can't grow up in a digital universe, a metaverse, and think that we're going to be okay, because it's rewiring humanity to becoming androids. It's requiring people to become on the spectrum. And back to your point, I think of humans as biopsychosocial beings. And that means that, yes, we have a genetic orientation, which I would say is our authentic self, is our and then there's epigenetic expressions based on our environment and who's in the environment and such. But I can speak as a former cult member that the real Steve liked poetry, liked music, liked to dance, liked girls, didn't like asking permission to go to the bathroom, wanted to sleep, wanted to decide what I did with my life. And for me, that was Steve, not subject to a crazy malignant narcissist.
And that's a good point, just even going back to what did you like? What worked for you? But then, people that haven't really studied cults have such a hard time understanding, like at the point where someone told you needed to ask permission to go to the bathroom, were you so far gone at that point that just seemed normal? Or were there times within yourself when all this was going on that you were thinking, this is crazy. Why do I have to ask permission?
Sure. In the initial phases, the first few days and weeks, you're going, I hope this is true. I wonder if this, and I wonder if that. But what they always want, the mind controllers always want to do, is isolate you from family, friends, from TV, and any sources of information other than yours. They want to sleep deprive you because you can't think clearly. And probably the most important universal mind control technique is the installation of phobias in people's minds to make them irrationally afraid to even think thoughts opposite what the leader or the policy says. And in my experience in the Moonies, interestingly enough, the Exorcist movie came out, and Moon rented the entire theater, brought a whole bunch of Moonies to see it, and then gave a lecture how God made this movie, and this is a prophecy of what will happen if we ever leave the church or question it. So I became so afraid of demonic possession, even though I didn't believe in demons a few weeks prior or Satan. I was so frightened by that movie, and I accepted Moon as the authority figure telling me what the truth was, because he had such certainty that I wasn't able to reality test. And indeed, part of what I teach family and friends to help people who've been recruited into a cult is to educate them that we have an amygdala in our base of our brain to keep us safe from danger, and we should have fear when there's danger. But we can have false positives where we think there's danger, but there's no danger. And the only way to tell is if we use our frontal cortex to evaluate and look for evidence. Is this a TV show with a lion on it, or is there an actual lion outside of a cage that's hungry? If you're like, oh, it's on a TV set, I'm in no danger, you shouldn't have a phobic reaction.
And haven't religions for centuries used the threat of demonic possession as a way to control people? Because, and I'm wondering, in your experience with the Moonies, would they ever tell people if they were starting to have doubts that those doubts were coming from Satan?
Of course, that's the standard, is of course they're coming from demons and such. Look, I get asked questions all the time about, wasn't the Catholic Church a cult when we did the Crusades? And I'm like, if you look at the Bite model, yeah. When the Pope said the doctrine of discovery in the 15th century and said, go forth and convert the natives or kill them, steal their children, put them in boarding schools. Of course, that's, was classic mind control, brainwashing stuff. But for me, I live in 2024. So when people like to use examples from the past, they say, let's talk today. And let's stay grounded. We've developed, we have democracy, we have rules of law, we have women now have rights to vote, and they shouldn't be sexually assaulted without their permission, etc. Let's use what we've gained and move forward to a positive future. So I reject the notion of everything is mind control and every religion in the world does mind control. I think there are healthy religious groups where you can, feel love oriented versus fear oriented, where it can be social justice oriented and not just, we'll help other people, but they got to belong. We'll help our members only. And so I really think that there needs to be less all or nothing, black and white thinking and more nuanced thinking about how to approach the issue of human rights worldwide.
Yeah, it seems like everything is on a continuum, and that's where it's both confusing, but also where studying cults can really teach us about human behavior, because it really is on the extreme of how people relate to each other.
So I'm unusual as a cult expert. Of course, I'm one of the more senior elders at this point. But I say there are cults along the entire continuum, and they say cults on ethical cults. And I'm like, yeah, have you ever heard of Rocky Horror Picture Show or Swifties or people who are fanatical fans of artists and actors and actresses and political parties even. It's like, okay, but do you have an ability to question? Do you have an ability to talk to critics and former members? Do you have an ability to leave without feeling harassed or attacked? And so we, those are some of the major criteria. And what I say to everybody is we should learn to be better listeners. We should learn to ask respectful, curious questions instead of trying to persuade others with facts, attacking the other person's beliefs or political party or group. And like with Trump members, I say, ask them, warmly, what's your earliest memory of Donald Trump? And people will say, oh, I saw him on The Apprentice. Oh, what'd you think? I thought he was an asshole. Oh, interesting. Tell me more. Well, he was a jerk. So walk me slowly through how you came to believe that he should be, president of the United States in the first place. And there were specific experiences, videos, people, other politicians, their clergy telling them God wants Donald Trump or whatever. So you help people unpack what was the process of how they changed their beliefs. And what I've learned with people in MAGA and Trump world is they will be open to talking about Chinese communist brainwashing techniques or pimps and traffickers and how they recruit and indoctrinate people to become sex or labor slaves. So again, it's about how to have discussions in a respectful way that encourage people to think for themselves and not just react emotionally. I'm going to share quickly a story. I was invited to a State Department counterterrorism meeting at the Aspen Institute in 2015 to understand how ISIS was recruiting online so effectively, despite all of the State Department's officials. And a man who was hired to evaluate their techniques, he said to us, you want to understand it? Think of STDs. And we're looking at each other, sexually transmitted diseases? He said, yup. He said, the more sex you have with someone with syphilis, the more likely you are to get it. And we went, He said, if you track what they're doing online, the more they identify a person, they keep contacting them, they call it swarming in the real world. When I was in, it was called love bombing, like circling people and telling them how great they are and how they're needed and all of that. And then they bring them offline to video games or to mating services, to Discord services, and then they just subject them to all kinds of video tapes and other programming, and it's being done online now.
And can you talk about what's happening right now at our college campuses? One of my concerns is not just for the Jewish students at these campuses, but the students that may be drawn into terrorist groups without realizing that's what's happening. Do you believe this is what's happening, that there's terrorist groups involved?
Yes. Let me explain that my understanding of what's happening online is psychological warfare by state actors and other bad actors. And the goal is chaos, called fourth generation warfare. The term was coined by William Lind, an American military strategist, who, by the way, met with Donald Trump in the White House, paired with Paul Weyrich of the Christian Right. And it's psychological warfare aimed at getting distrust against experts, distrust against science, and distrust against democratic institutions. So again, the idea isn't to convert the person to a particular point of view. It's to infiltrate on the progressive left and the right and radicalize and create so much disturbance emotionally, disgust, anger, hatred so that it creates chaos, and like rational thinking is drowned out by the voices. So regarding the situation with Israel and Muslims who were displaced, and the colonization that Britain had over Palestine, there's a long history of conflict that it seemed all level-headed people said we should have a two-state solution, and we need democratic values and women's values, and not let extremist Jewish people run the country, or extremist terrorist Islamist groups from Iran to run the country. And so where we're at the moment was this horrible invasion on October 7th, these horrible kidnappings and rapes and tortures and murders, and then the Netanyahu government doing what it's been doing to try to rout out Hamas. However, Hamas is using citizens, Muslim citizens. They don't care how many Muslims are dead, because all they care about is winning the psychological warfare war worldwide. And people forget there are a billion Muslims and there's a few million Jewish people around the world. It's like a understanding of this whole routine. But the point, for me on campuses that is missed largely is this campaign that's been developed over a long period of time by the Koch Corporation, which I did a whole blog and interview on the second largest private corporation in the United States that does fossil fuels. The Fred Koch was a John Bircher. They're pushing free speech, only it's free speech not against them for burning up our planet and being greedy and following the cult of Ayn Rand and the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, this libertarian extremist corporate cult. It's just wanting chaos. We need free speech. Well, the law has been very clear for a long time. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater if there is no fire. It's called a lie, right? That's the law. That's the rule. And yet we need free speech, even if it's lies, and it's like, hello, what is this? Is there really free speech? No, because we're living together in a society. We have to respect other people's opinions. We have to listen to each other. And it's very clear to me, Hamas is a terrorist death cult. Period. Hard stop. They've been trained from birth to be martyrs, death to Jews, death to America. We need to understand this is not an organization that is going to be benign. And so, again, on college campuses, it's a horrible situation in the Middle East. I kind of like Thomas Friedman the most in terms of his analyses of things, but I've largely stayed out of the discussion because I can't have the time to be able to go in depth about the fact that I wrote about Netanyahu in the cult of Trump, as part of the cult of Trump, or that Putin is using the million Jewish refugees that live in Israel, and they're listening to his propaganda and backing Netanyahu. I'm for democracy, freedom. I have a female Jewish rabbi, conservative trained orthoprax. She's not accepted as a legitimate rabbi in Israel. Excuse me? I'm Jewish, I'm American, yes, I'm in the diaspora, but this is not an Israel that resonates with my values and understanding of Judaism. And yet, speaking out, it enters into the left or the right. Steve, you have to be all this or all that. And I'm not. I am against authoritarianism in all forms, on the left and the right. And I really don't want to be taken out of context in a short little snippet. I want to state categorically that people have the right to protest. I protested against the Vietnam War. I was not a communist. I was about to be in the draft lottery to go to Vietnam, and it just seemed like this was not saving America and the world from communism. This seemed like a horrible waste of money and lives and military stuff. And I just want everybody to stop and think we're on this fragile earth and the clock is ticking, and we need to start thinking planetary survival. Like, what do we need to do to stay alive for our children's sake and our grandchildren's sake and the next 7 generations' sake instead of the next election cycle? It's too short-sighted.
Well, and what do you think we need to do to stay alive?
I think we need to come back to values. And I hate to sound like preaching, but I really believe in freedom of mind. And I say it's your mind, you should control it. And in order to control it, you need to understand mechanisms of control that are being exercised on you.
Well, and how do we reconcile the extreme positions that our media outlets are taking? You know, one of my biggest concerns when I watch either one, I'd say especially Fox, but I see this on CNN and MSNBC, is when the other side is talked about, the words are said with such bitterness, with such hatred, you know, those liberals, those Democrats, those Republicans, as if these words are dirty words. And when I hear that, that concerns me the most, because immediately there's people hearing that and not only thinking, yeah, there must be something wrong with them, but then it's like, well, I don't want to be like them, right? I don't want to have people talk that way about me. And so they're moving further away. So what can we do about this? Can the government step in and do something about this?
I don't think the government is in any position to do it. There are too many politicians who've been co-opted. So again, I really think that people need to step back and understand that a lot of what's happening in the media is emotional arousal, disgust, fear, anger against the other, and making the other into objects, which is, you know, what Hitler did with Jews. You know, he called us vermin, and therefore, because we were vermin, we could be stamped out. And whenever anybody makes another human being into an object that makes it easier to do violence to them, I really don't see any other way but educating everybody who's willing to listen to understand the media is exerting huge influence. It's the eye of the bite model, information control. And we need to come back to, like, who do we trust? And come down back to people we actually know in our lives, and not followers and strangers who are influencers. And I have a 48-year track record pretty consistently being anti-authoritarianism, pro-human rights, pro-gay rights, pro-women's rights, indigenous rights, rights of all. And we need to come back to rule of law and common sense and approaching each other as fellow human beings. And so that's why I'm doing this interview, because the mainstream media is not having me on because I'm too in the middle and too sane. They want this extreme or that extreme. And so, but in the end, I'd say former cult members who've lost their freedom and now really appreciate it, there are, in my opinion, a huge number of people who could be stepping up, sharing their stories, explaining that yes, the mind can be hacked and people can leave and be good citizens, and to not be so fast to attack and judge people that are on the extremes.
It is so hard to talk about these things. I mean, you're doing a terrific job here of where you just want to talk about the points and talk things through. You're not trying to come from one perspective or the other. But these days, I find like when I meet someone on the street and we start to talk about these things, I guess because you kind of want to know, like, am I safe talking to this person? You know, what, like, what words should I say or shouldn't I say so they're not going to get upset? So there's almost like this adjusting that happens very quickly, like, you know, well, what's their position and are they thinking like me or not like me? And just it's very confusing and complicated to even begin to feel like I can just have a conversation about the issues, and maybe I will say something that isn't right and they'll correct me, or, you know, how do we deal with this?
It's a great question. So what I want to say is assume people are good and don't assume the worst is my rule. And I do think that what doesn't work is attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the policy of any cult or extremist group. And arguing with facts is for sure not going to work. It's going to make them feel attacked, and it's going to bolster their sense of identification with their cult identity. So if you know that doesn't work, don't do it. And I'm a big advocate for saying, you know, let's create some parameters or some ground rules for interacting. And if it's someone who you know from school or work, you can make the time to say, I care about you, I respect you, I would like to have a relationship with you. I don't expect you to agree with all of the things that I believe in, and I don't expect you will expect me to agree with everything but let's listen to each other, and let's be open-minded to the possibility that we may want to change our opinions if the facts and the evidence and my personal experience fits. I absolutely love Adam Grant's book, Think Again. Have you ever heard of that book? Think Again. Adam Grant is a very famous organizational psychologist at Wharton School of Business. And the premise of the book is, look, we're human, we grow, we learn, like separate your ego from your beliefs and just go for the learning. And if there's a better way of explaining phenomena and reality, be prepared to change your hypothesis. That's the essence of science. It's like, we believe this, but if there's a better experiment that can prove that reality is different, we'll adopt that one. Have an open-minded approach. But the key thing is be curious, be respectful, ask questions. Don't expect to win an argument or change anyone's mind in an hour. And what I like to recommend to people, if it's a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, somebody close to you that you really care about, just make some ground rules and even say, let's meet for an hour a week or 2 hours a week. You get an hour to share a video with me that was very persuasive. Let's agree to watch it together. We'll hit the pause button and we'll discuss it. Then it will be my turn to share a video. Same rules. And let's keep going back and forth because you matter. And I'm not so committed to my beliefs that I'm not willing to consider other points of view. That's my recommendation.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, going back to if someone has a family member and they feel like that family member is involved in a cult but is not ready to see what's really going on, what are some initial steps they can take?
Well, I wrote a book called Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs. And I've written a whole bunch of blogs. I've now moved to Substack that people can read on what to do and what not to do. But the first step is educating yourself and understanding what are the critical points and understanding the arguments. Like when people would talk to me as a Moonie and say, are you happy that you're in the church? And I'd be like, yes, I'm doing God's will. I'm very happy. People would be like, oh, well, he says he's happy. And it's like, I'm curious, instead of saying to the person, okay, so that's really interesting. Do you ever feel down? Like all humans have moments where they're not feeling so good, or when somebody does something in the group that you don't like. Oh, no, I'm always happy. Well, so, how long have you been in? Oh, 10 years. Have you made any close friends? Oh, yes, I made a lot of close friends. Have you ever had a close friend who's left? Yeah. When they left, did you ever go and talk with them and find out why they left? No. Why would I do that? I don't know, because they were a close friend and might be interesting to hear another point of view. Well, I don't want to hear that. And that indicates the whole programming thing, that information that's critical, former members are non-people, etc. But what I've learned is you can't attack straight on. You have to talk about another group that the person would agree is a mind control group and cover the points there first. Then once they agree with you, yep, Chinese communist brainwashing is real or pimps are real, then you say, I'm really interested to know how you understand what this policy of your group is different than the policy of the Chinese communist government. I really would like to know that. And if it's done with respect and curiosity, the person may not say, you're right, I'm out, but they're going to start having dissonance. They're going to start thinking about it. And people need to have a face-saving exit ramp, and they need to be able to say, you know what? I decided I don't want to be in it anymore. And what family and friends shouldn't do is like, what took you so long? Or, I've tried to tell you for 10 years that it was a cult. And people actually said things like that to me, 10 years, but you know what I'm trying to convey? It's like, that is not helpful. If someone has been traumatized and mind control, they need TLC. And it's like, oh, you're back. Great. Love to hang out with you. Let's go bowling. Let's go fishing. Let's go to play sports together. Let's hang out.
Yeah. And, that was something that was a big lesson for me in relationships, that you can tell someone something, whether something that is bothering you or just tell someone something, and in that moment they may disagree, or that it doesn't look like you've had any impact, and you may be prone to keep arguing because in that moment they're not responding how you want them to. And then lo and behold, whether an hour or day or month later, it turns out that they do adjust their behavior. It makes an impact, but a lot of times we just are really going based on that immediate reaction from them.
Yeah, it's a process to get mind controlled, and it's a process to get unmind controlled, or as I frame it, empowering people to think for themselves. But explaining what the difference is between a phobia and a legitimate fear, as I teach in chapter 10 of the Freedom of Mind book, of what the structure of a phobia is, and explaining that and talking about how other groups put phobias in to control members' minds, and then asking what do they think would happen if they left their group? Could they imagine being happy and fulfilled, or being with God if they leave their group? Just getting, undoing the programming. Because what I've learned is that people deep down inside, they don't want to be exploited and controlled. They want to be free. And lastly, what I'll say is real friends love you no matter what. Real family members, this is conditional love. We'll love you if you do what we tell you to do or you stay in the group. It's very different. When you're in one of these things and you fear leaving or sharing a doubt with anyone because they'll tell on you or they'll harass you, then you know you're in an unhealthy group.
So there's a movie called the Twin Flame Cult. And it was so disturbing because basically the gist of it was that this group was telling people they would help find their twin flames and soulmates. But there were too many women, not enough men to pair people up with. So they actually convinced some of their members that they were the wrong gender, that they should have sex change operations and then get together with another member of the same sex. And people actually did that. They changed genders and then later realized, well, this isn't really who I am.
Right. I'm familiar with the group. I've helped people in that particular cult. People need to understand Heaven's Gate. They thought they were aliens in human bodies. They didn't even think they were a gender, and the guys had their testicles removed because it was interfering with their mission as aliens. I've had people who were gay who were brainwashed to believe they were straight, so-called conversion therapy, which doesn't work. I've had people who were straight have sex with their homosexual teacher who said it wasn't sex, but they were being sodomized regularly. The mind is a very powerful device, and it can be programmed to believe all kinds of things. And as a therapist and a gay rights and trans rights supporter, I just think people need to get therapy, figure out what's going on, not watch hypno-porn and, be subjected to online influences that don't resonate with who they really are. And people should talk to detransitioners, because there's a ton of them, and hear their story and really reality check if they really think they're in the wrong body. All I can say is life is complicated, but mind control, we know, exists.
Do you think it's too easy for people to make such radical changes when it could be part of influence in either direction?
I've arrived at a position where I'm against giving underage children puberty blockers when the FDA hasn't approved puberty blockers because they haven't done long-term therapy. So I think that I feel very comfortable saying. And I really think that anyone who wants to engage in hormone therapy and such needs to do more than show up for an hour and get a letter of approval or just order it online from another country. I think people should get therapy. Part of the problem is there's not enough qualified trained therapists. That's a piece of it.
All right. Well, we will definitely provide information in writing about how people can get in touch with your website, and also we'll put all your books up so they can easily find your books. And I can say firsthand, they're really incredible resources. And I just want to thank you because you really are making a difference in so many people's lives. And hopefully this interview will, continue to do that.
I hope so. And really, there's a lot to learn, and we need to know what we need to know in order to go through this next period of time, because it's not just the election in November, it's the next 10 to 20 years. So people have to realize this has been many years in the making to get to this mess, and it's going to be many years to dig ourselves out of the mess. And I'm, for one, not willing to give up or lose hope. I think we have to really be very constructive, use our time wisely, work together, act locally. And if you do have a bigger reach, or the YouTube, reach out to others. And thank you for inviting me on, Deborah.
What did you think of that interview with Dr. Steven Hassan? I'd love to hear your comments, anything you feel you really learned from that interview, what you agree with, what you might not disagree with, and perhaps most of all, have you had any personal experiences with cults, either yourself having been part of a cult or a loved one? What did you do to become aware? What did you do to get out of the cult or help somebody else? You can put that in the comments underneath this video. And I do encourage all of you to subscribe to New Thinking Allowed. If you enjoyed this interview, then hold on to your seat because you have a lot of videos to watch. Endless. You could do nothing else for the rest of your life, and you probably wouldn't get through the entire collection. And if that wasn't enough, every single week, New Thinking Allowed is producing more and more videos. And I also want to give a shout out to the California Institute for Human Sciences, which is going to be starting a parapsychology program starting in January. This is going to be considered a concentration that falls under the psychology program, and people can get undergraduate and advanced degrees in many different topics related now to parapsychology, noetic sciences, transpersonal psychology, and so much more. So do check out their website, the California Institute for Human Sciences, which is a fully accredited school and is a great choice if you are looking for a formal academic degree. With that, I hope you enjoyed the interview, and until next time, take care.
New Thinking Allowed is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Allowed Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. New Thinking Allowed is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Allowed dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Allowed magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.